All right, Tammy said, I need a skip head brother, which is true. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to delay us. What I'm going to do is there's a whole bunch of scripture stuff, and I put them on the notes. So on the notes, there's the scripture references. So I'm just going to go over the main part of the scripture references and not, you have to put it in context. We'll try to fit it in context. Because there are so many, especially in these sections, and these continue. So anyway, Hebrews is just like, if you notice, it's almost like a technical text, right? You guys have read scientific text, right? And you know every page has quotes and has stuff on the bottom of the page, right? What do we call it? Citations, cites. You know, where the citations come from in every book, and then the bibliographies in the back. So if you're familiar with that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But the words of the day, here's some really cool words. Apolutrosin. 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 Okay, apo is off. And lustrous. This means to loosen. Loosen. The word comes from apolustrous, the primary word, which means to pay a redemption fee. So to ransom in full. Okay. I mean, this is a really neat word because it means a ransom has been paid. And of course, we know how that fits within the context of Christianity, right? Because the last words on the cross were telestai, which means it's paid. It's paid in full. So what's really neat about this is, okay, they have a word. Now we have a word ransom, right, in English. The Greek concept of ransom, you can see it, right? Because I need a word that means to ransom in full. And you see how the word comes to it, to loosen. Lustros means to loosen. So in other words, I'm bound, I'm captive, and I off loosen. That's to ransom in full. So I paid the debt, so you're released. So do you see this? You know, our idea of paying a ransom, you pay the ransom. Their idea of paying a ransom, well, you pay in installments. And I suspect the big deal how this fits is, do you remember the slaves? We had the book slaves or the scroll slaves, which Plato was a scroll slave, right? So how did he earn his freedom? Just like the early, what do we call them? The slaves. What's that? Indentured servants in America, right? People indentured themselves. And by the way, remember, the indentured servant thing, we have a total perverse and incorrect view of history. Where were the indentured servants in the European world? Everywhere. The girl with the pearl. Remember the girl with the pearl earring? She was an indentured servant. Indentured servants were the norm in Europe until 1833, when basically slavery was, you know, the indentured servant system was not fully done until about 1833. That's when the British said no more enslavement. And indentured servanthood probably continued after that, although I haven't really researched it much. But almost everybody came to the United States they were indentured servants, right? They had their way paid because through that. And how did they pay off their debt?
Work it.
Yeah, and when we say work, it's installments. So I suspect the Greeks were exactly the same way. Now, they wouldn't have called it necessarily a ransom the same way, but this is the concept, that you're paying off your debt to get out of servitude, out of your debt. This word, Prosde, Xi, A-M-E-N-O-I. It's a Xi sound, or the Xi word. Pros, Odexemenoi. Oh, oh, wow, that's really funny because they put the sound is I, but they put the chi sound in there. Anyway, the preposition of direction is forward to. So this is pro or pros, and that's forward to, or to. And dexeomai. Okay, so dechomai, which means to receive. So remember all those times we say lambonai, is it? Lambano. Lambano means to take. Dechomai means to receive. So if they meant receive, they would have said dechomai, not lambano. But they say lambano. We'll see that again in a case where we wouldn't expect it, but it's prevalent in the Greek. So forward to receive, and this means...
Is it more passive than lambano?
Lambano literally means to grasp.
Right.
So receive, in our language, to take and receive seems obvious, right? And in the Greek it is too. So it's just peculiar to me, and it should be peculiar to do, why our translators decided to put lambano as receive, because it isn't. Now, I suspect it may be what Al discovered. Remember, there's Strong's and Vines. Vines is the New Testament source, and is considered the absolute New Testament source, where Strong's is an older, mostly Hebrew, but they also have a lot of Greek. There's Greek Strong's numbers. And if you look at the Greek, I suspect that it's either a misunderstanding of the Strong's, that has, it was an academic error that has passed through till today, to now, to forever, right? And like I told you, why don't they change the translations? Nobody will buy them, right?
Our theology is based on his translation.
You know what? Here's a secret. It wasn't until 1823 or 1826. In 1826, you got your Bibles. And that's nothing wrong with that. The problem is, in 1826, though, you expected every pastor to know a smattering of Greek and Hebrew especially, right? They knew their Latin. The world is, okay, has education, I think, has gotten worse. Back in old Martin Luther's day, Martin Luther knew a smattering of Greek and Hebrew, but he really wasn't a Greek and Hebrew scholar. He knew Latin, right? And he, for the first time ever, he found a Bible that was just sitting there, right? Before that, he had most likely he had little pamphlets or short pieces or maybe even short books out of the Bible. But for the first time, it says he found a Bible. And he opened it to Hebrews. And it was a Latin Bible, I'm certain. And he read, that's where he read, right, about grace and got his ideas. And when you realize he had never seen a Bible, right? He'd maybe seen parts and pieces, but never seen a complete Bible, never perused it before. And then as time went by, because they translated the Bible into the tongues, into German and English and they'd already done that, right? Anglo-Saxon, you may not know this. There is a Bible in Anglo-Saxon, or parts of the Bible in Anglo-Saxon, and parts of the Bible in other tongues. So they translated. But the most important thing was, when you started translating it, what did you need to do?
You should go back to the Greek and Hebrew, but I don't think they did.
Well, I'll put to you that they did, especially after Martin Luther and those guys. But what happened was, in 1826, what happened? They got their Bibles. When you got your Bible, what did that make every man and woman? Your own interpreter.
Yeah.
Right? And that, okay, and I call this, other people have too, I call this the evangelical heresy. The evangelical heresy is the idea that I take my English or Greek, German, or whatever translation, and I read it, and by whatever it says, I make up whatever I want. There's some person that said they don't worry about sinning and pornography. Their pornography it was a porno star. Said they don't worry about their sex and pornography because they know Jesus will forgive them every time. What did Paul say?
Don't go on sinning so that grace may increase.
Yeah, you don't keep sinning for grace to abound. It's like, you're cracking me up. So, the Bible's already covered this, but maybe she just missed that part. Or maybe her pastor missed that part. I don't know. But you see what happens with the evangelical heresy. If each of us is interpreting on our own based on an English or German or whatever translation instead of the Greek, then we got a serious issue here, right? And if I were a translator, that's why I don't like to translate. At the end of this class, I promise I'm going to provide a translation of Hebrews. But I do not like to translate. Because if it's better for us, in my opinion, to compare and contrast based on what we see in the Greek. Because then we're not translating, like we're not making it up, right? We're just looking to see what it says and comparing and contrasting to understand it better. But if you translate it, what did you just do?
You put a certain meaning on it.
Yeah, you set it in stone. And I don't want to set it in stone because, I think I'm right. But, I might not be perfectly right. So I'd rather you contrast and compare so you make your own decisions. That's the point of this class anyway. So, for to receive means to admit. To admit. To admit. And by the way, it's to admit. It doesn't mean to admit to something. It means to basically to admit someone to hospitality, into a house, to credence. It doesn't necessarily admit, this is not admitting to a crime or to, sin or whatever. What's that?
To consent?
Access, maybe.
To access, to allow someone, to admit into, if you got tickets to the theater, right? And I'm the theater person, you say, well, you're admitted to the theater. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remind you where we are. The thing I love, okay, persuaded the prostitute. This is 31. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. The last persuaded the prostitute Rahab received the scouts amid peace, was not destroyed in company with those who were not persuaded. That was our translation. And then 32, and what argues more, assigning a reason, the time of the gods is insufficient for me to relate fully all about Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, David also, and Samuel and the prophets. And then 33 is where we were. It says, translation, who through persuasion struggled against royalty, told equity, chanced upon the gospel, fenced lions' mouths. And we were at, let's see, we're done with that one. We're going to continue on. So 2 Samuel, in the course of time, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them, and he took Metheg, Ammah, from the control of the Philistines, which is really an important thing because no one else had really defeated the Philistines. The Philistines were not totally, wiped out of the Levant. They were still hanging on because they were coastal dwellers, and you know that the Israelis, the Jewish people, were not a coastal power. They were a pillage power. They were not a coastal pillage power, and I talked about that last time. In 15, it says, David reigned over all of Israel, doing what was just and right for all his people. And then 2 Samuel 10, 12, be strong and let us fight bravely for our people and the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good and is right. And this is Joab. Joab said, if the Arameans are too strong for me, then you will come to my rescue. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I will come to rescue you. So basically, this is pointing to the next generation that we're fighting. Let's see. And then Daniel 6. This is the 21. Daniel answered, O my king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have ever done any wrong before you, O king. So what we have is we have direct relation And as I said, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but the realization should be that these are mnemonics. The writing is mnemonics. So I have memorized the text, and I'm reciting it to you from the mnemonic. Exactly. And every time I hit one of these, what does your brain do?
Which, remember where that came from.
It goes directly to each of those keywords. You know, we call them keywords today, right? Keywords, especially in the Greek, because it's a Septuagint. Every quote in the New Testament is from the Septuagint. So we know by that the readers, the hearers, the readers and hearers, those who had memorized it, were cogent in the Septuagint. And are there chapters? Are there verses? Is there punctuation? The only way you can get to this stuff, I can't tell you, go to John 3:16. I can't say go to Isaiah 53:1. I can't say go to Daniel 6, whatever, 10. I can't tell you that. But if I tell you about the lion's mouth stopped up, your brain goes, oh, Samson, Daniel, right? Because you've got it memorized. And guess what? You know it all. I mean, okay, can you imagine if you had memorized every single piece of the Septuagint? Because you had to, right? To be able to read it. So for your entertainment, you know it all. And you memorize it all. And the minute I say it to you, it's just like if I say, so for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. It's John 3:16. And you immediately know, oh, you see Nicodemus with Jesus. And you may not remember every word because you haven't memorized it. But maybe you did. Some people have. So this is an important thing to get your cultural blinders and your historical blinders, in the proper way. So this is the way that people are thinking. Yes, ma'am.
Last week, I wasn't here. Did you talk about the people in verse 32? The people listed there?
Just a little bit. What I did is, let's see, what did I say about those?
We went through all the scriptures that the ladies are.
Well, I got to 33 and I got bogged down.
So should I go on YouTube and find last week's? Because some of those people in the list, of course, seem a little suspect. With Barak, he wasn't all that convinced. He had to have Deborah go with him, and he didn't get credit for the victory. And Jephthah, wasn't he the one who sacrificed his daughter? Like, what's he doing there?
What I did is, my focus, and I read from each of those in the context, and the thing that I precisely wanted people to see is that when you look at that verse, especially the 32, and what we talked about, and this is just a synopsis version, but yeah, you might want to go look at the, when I get it posted up. But if you look at 32, my point was this. Remember, we ended with Rahab, a woman, an independent woman who was not dependent on any man, the peak of creation. And the next one we get is Deborah. Because without Barak, there's no Deborah. Deborah was the judge. Barak was not. He was her military minister, right? So what you end up having is, do you see what this is? The Gentile woman, and the next thing you get is they didn't call it a king, they called it a judge. It's a ruler of Israel who was a woman. The peak of creation. And then, I think you're right, that's worthy, I did not go into huge detail, but that's worthy of looking at because he did sacrifice his daughter, or the implication is that he sacrificed his daughter, right? But do you see? Who was persuaded? It wasn't him. What could his daughter have done? She could have said, all right, dude, I'm gone, right? But instead, we know from and I didn't reread, I'm not going to reread it, but
He kept his oath.
He kept his oath, but she willingly went, right? She willingly went, right? So who was really persuaded? She was persuaded. What this is a contrast so that the people of the time, just like the scripture we read today, in Christ there is no male or female, free or slave, right? No Jew or Gentile. the whole thing is that that is what the setup is in Hebrews. The peak are these women. And he couldn't help, he had to add in 32, I hate to go back to this, but he had to add in David and Samuel and the prophets, the foretellers, right? And we kind of read about those. But then he goes on, and that's why we had 33. Let's go look at 34. I know there's more to it, and I believe that lesson was one I caught because I've had problems with my recording. I missed 2 lessons. I think I missed 86 and 88, something like that, but I haven't missed any others, so sorry about that. 34, here's the NIV. Quench the fury of the flames and escape the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Okay, quenched. It's shabume, to extinguish. Extinguish, the is added, dunamis, the force, the miraculous force. This is interesting. The miraculous force of is added, pure. The fire of lightning, especially the fire of Zeus. All right, if I say that, you automatically know who I'm talking about, right? Even though it says, quench the fury of the flames, you kind of get that idea from there. But the minute I say, extinguish the miraculous force of the fire, dun, 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 probably the fiery furnace, right? I got fire's furnace. Escaped, fugo, to run away, run away. The is added, the soma, the mouth, as in the gash of a face of the sword. It's the makaria, a knife, judicial punishment. It's really interesting that the Greeks did not have a word for sword. The Romans did. Makaria is knife. It also means judicial punishment, which is really interesting. We'll see how that fits because I got a reference to that. Out of, it's not out of, it's off. Off, asthenia, feebleness. Were made strong, dynamo. They were enabled through miraculous force. Wax, genomite, cause to be. Wax is interesting. Genomite, to cause to be. Isurus, forcible. In palomus, in warfare. Turned to flight, klino, to slant or slope. This is interesting. Turn to flight is klino, to slant or slope. The is added, the parimbola. This is one of the words I gave you. A throwing aside, basically an army camp. Of the is added, allothros, others, and others. So let's see. Here's a literal of this. Extinguished force, extinguished miraculous force of fire, fire from lightning, specifically Zeus. Ran away mouth, as in a gash in the face, a gash in the face, a knife, judicial punishment. Off feebleness, enabled, cause to be forceful in warfare, to slant or slope, a throwing in beside, a juxtaposition on others. This is kind of complicated stuff. Let's see what it says in a translation. Extinguished miraculous fire from the heavens. Extinguished miraculous fire from the heavens. Ran away from the mouth of judicial punishment. From enabled feebleness caused to be forceful in warfare, to flank another's alliance. The Greek is always concrete. So I got more than one right here. Extinguish miraculous fire from the heavens. Not only is that the fiery furnace, it's also, you remember one of the most funniest in the whole Bible?
When they did the Baal sacrifice?
Yeah, the prophets of Baal, remember? They're cutting themselves, and Elijah, is Elijah or Elisha? Elijah is sitting there going, yeah, cut yourself more. Yell a little bit louder. Go ahead. Maybe he can't hear you. Louder, louder. You know, and they're chopping themselves and cutting themselves, and you know, nothing happens. And then old Elijah has them pour the water over the sacrifice, and he goes, okay, and poof, it's gone, and so are the prophets of Baal. They're all like burned up, right? I mean, it is hilarious. It is so funny. But, you know, it's like, they should make a movie of that. How come there's no movie of that one? That would have been a great one. I guess it's too much about God. Anyway, yeah. The flanked alliance. Yeah.
Hollywood.
There will be Hollywood, right? Yeah. So the question would be, who flanked the armies of an alliance? And Okay, this is interesting stuff. There's a whole bunch in there. I guess I'll give you some of this. Okay, so Exodus 18:4. After Moses sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her 2 sons. One son was named Gershom, for Moses said, I had become an alien in a foreign land. The other was named Elzer, for my father's God was my helper. He saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. That's the Macarena. So anytime you know there's going to be the word knife, remember they have no word for sword in Greek, so it's going to be Macarena. It's going to be a knife, the judicial punishment of Pharaoh. So that was 18:4, and then Judges chapter 7, 21. 3 companies blew the trumpets, smashed the jars, grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow. They shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. A sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Well, each man held his position around the camp. All the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. Wow, that fits, doesn't it? You got the sword and you have the flanking of an army, which is exactly what Gideon did to the Midianites. Judges 15. Samson said to them, since you've acted like this, I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. He went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam. And then 15, finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. I always like to remind you, why did he use the donkey's jawbone? That's all he had. The first thing he did when you conquered any nation, the first thing the Philistines did, the first thing the Assyrians did, the Syrians, the Babylonians, the Romans, everybody did. The first thing you did was you took
Their guns.
their guns. You took their weapons. They didn't have guns. If they had guns, they would have taken their guns. They took their weapons. And so the only thing that he had was the jawbone of an ass. And if you think about it, now the Romans allowed them to keep knives because the Romans were pretty smart. The Romans realized that if I take your knives, I destroy your manufacturing and your ability to make food and other things. So the Romans were pretty smart. They let them do that. But the Assyrians and Philistines, were they smarter or dumber? They completely devastated their economies because without a knife, you can't really prepare anything. So I just want to point that out. 1 Samuel 17. Let's see. 1 Samuel 17. That's a long one. 1 Samuel 17. 51. David ran, so David, 50. David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand. Without a sword in his hand. He struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword, Macarena, and drew it from the scabbard. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw their hero was dead, they turned and ran. 18. The next day, this is 10. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcibly upon Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the harp, as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand. He hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. Let's see. 1 Samuel 19. But an evil spirit from the Lord 9 came upon Saul as he was sitting in his house with a spear in his hand while David was playing the harp. And Saul tried to pin him to the wall with a spear, but David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good his escape. What's interesting about both these is they are different chapters, but similar references, and the context is different. I'll let you do that on your own. 2 Samuel, chapter 8, 1. In the course of time, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them. Then he took Meg-Ammon from the control of the Philistines we had before. 2 Samuel 10. 14. When the Ammonites saw the Arameans were fleeing, they fled before Abishai and went inside the city. So Joab returned from fighting the Ammonites and came to Jerusalem. After the Arameans saw that they had been routed by Israel, they regrouped. So that's directly to that, foiling alliances. 1 Kings 19. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So the Macarena, there we go. And also we know that was the previous one too. And I wonder if that's in here. It should be. 2 Kings 6. In the company of the prophets said to Elijah, look, the place where we meet with you is too small for us. Let us go to Jordan, needs to get a pole. Let's go to a place there for us slaves to go. Company of prophets. I'm not sure why that fits, but that was one of the references I had. Let's see. The context, you got to get the context. Psalm 124. 7. We have escaped like a bird out of the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken and we have escaped. So there's a whole psalm about this. The context is beautiful. The 144th psalm, which is my favorite psalm and my personal psalm, that is not in our prayer book, it's not in our thing. I guess it's too bad because it starts, praise be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. On 10 it says, to the one who gives victory to kings, who delivers his servant David from the deadly sword. Macarena right there. And then Daniel 3, let's see, Daniel chapter 3, that's where we have Rakshak, Meshach, and Abednego. The 3 men firmly tied fell into the blazing furnace. 27. Satraps, prefects, governors, royal advisors crowded around them. They saw the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. And what was really funny, too, I mean, there's a lot of funny stuff in here that we miss, but remember the ones that threw them into the furnace?
Yeah,
They died.
They got burned up, yeah, yeah. Look, I know, okay, if you're a pillage culture, you think that's funny. If you're, Monty Python, you think it's kind of funny too, blowing up sheep and stuff like that, but that's just the culture. So just so you know.
I was also thinking of Judges 16, 22 to 30, for, it mentions Samson and then it says were made strong out of weakness. So after he was made weak, then his hair began to grow again and everything, and he repented and asked God to make him strong one more time and brought down the temple of David on everybody.
I think it's a beautiful one. Probably the reason it wasn't mentioned, although it fits very well in that context. And see, you're doing what the writer wants you to do. You're grabbing hold of it and fitting it within what you know is from the past. That's the point, right? But the whole point of the author is exactly that. The reason it probably doesn't fit is because the words, and I did not check every word in the Septuagint, I'm sorry, but the Septuagint probably doesn't use exactly the same word, right? What they're doing is they're doing that trick of keywords. And I could go over the rabbinic context thing like we had, and I kept Peshat, Remez Peshat, whatever. Remember that from a long time ago? I probably should review that. But the meanings are gained within the context of words. So in this case, they're Greek words. But that's a beautiful observation. Here's 35. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured and refused to be released, so they might gain a better resurrection. So here it is in the translation. Women, gune, wives. Women received, and it's not received, it's lambano. It's lambano. Took back their selves. It's a reflexive pronoun. Their selves. They took back their selves, nekros, dead. Anastasis. Anastasis, same word, anastasis ek nekros. In this case, it doesn't say anastasis ek nekros. It says they took back themselves, their dead, their nekros, raised ek. So they put it in a different word order than we're used to. So nekros, anastasis ek, which is interesting. Life again is added. It's not and, it's but others, allos, else, were tortured. I want to give you this word. It's thump panizo. Literally, it means to stretch on an instrument of torture resembling a drum and beat you to death. Very interesting. I don't know where that torture method came from. I've never seen a movie, so obviously not exciting enough for some. But we did see people going into temple bells in Japan, but not killing each other. They were just ringing them while they were sitting under a bell. This is as big as you are. You wonder how long you could live through that. Not, accepting. Pros dekomai. This is that word right there. To admit, deliverance. Al polustris, ransoming in full. that hina, in order that they might obtain, it's tukano. Tukano. Okay, I love this. It's not they might obtain, it's tukano. Guys, remember this one? This was last week.
Hitting the mark.
Yeah, to hit the mark. To hit the mark. To hit the mark as a mark to be reached. A is added, better, kreton, a stronger anastasis, a stronger resurrection. This is really interesting. So here's the literal. Wives, women took theirselves dead standing up again, from butt outstretched on an instrument of torture resembling a drum, and beat to death, not admitting ransoming in full, in order that they hit or light upon, as a mark to be reached, reach a mark, stronger standing up again. So let's see what a translation would look like. Wives took back themselves their dead, standing up again. But others, stretched on an instrument of torture resembling a drum and beat to death, did not accept being ransomed in full, in order that they hit the mark, a stronger standing up again. These are concrete. The points that make there, Jude mentioned this torture in the Maccabees. Jude mentioned the torture from the Maccabees and other apocryphal documents, and I've got the Maccabean quote in here, so we can look at that. But in 1 Kings 17, in 22, the Lord heard Elijah's crying. This is what we looked at before. And the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child and carried him down from the room into the house. He gave him to his mother and said, "Look, your son is alive." When I researched this one, the word dead does not occur. It says that the breath went out of him, the nephesh went out of him. However, the next one is 2 Kings chapter 4, in which 36, Elisha summoned Giza and said, "Call the Shamanite," and he did. And when she came, he said, "Take your son." And she did, and fell at his feet, because he had brought the son back to life. And by the way, in this one, in Kings, it does say, in the Hebrew, it used the words that the boy was dead. But still, I'll stand by the point. I don't believe anyone expected people to come back from life or from death. I don't think even in the Hebrew viewpoint, it was a accepted idea. I think it was surprising. That's why it surprised well. Even if we expect it to be common knowledge in the Hebrew, was it common knowledge to the Greeks?
No.
No. Or how about to the Egyptians? Or to the Romans? The Romans made a practice of killing people, right? When you're dead, you're dead. They did it for fun or profit. Remember doxa. So whatever the Hebrews thought, the rest, and I'll put you this too. Hebraic thought, cool. But what do you think they probably did with it? Based on what you know of the way they look at philosophy and ideas. Remember the Sanhedrin, did they believe in life after death?
No. The Sadducees.
I'm sorry, the Sadducees. The Sadducees, they did not believe in life after death. They did not believe in the Mishnah. They only followed the Torah and the Torah law, right? The Pharisees, on the other hand, believed in life after death. Well, wait a second. The priest would have said, if you're dead, you're dead. Now, you know, the Pharisees would say, well, there's hope, right? There's something. But I'm just trying to point out, I think there's more to this story, right? But it's very interesting, because the one that I think that they're relating to, remember, we're moving up in time, right? So the one that's probably the one that they mean is the Maccabean one, which is 2 Maccabees 6. And I don't know where to start on this, but I just say go ahead and read Maccabees the 6, and it's 18 through 6:18 through 7:42. If you've got it, go look for yourself. But this is a whole thing about both torture and a woman who was granted back her children. And I don't think it was miraculous, but I don't remember. So anyway, but it's really long, and but it's worth looking at and studying. Okay. So what is interesting to me, though, is the fact that it says that the women took themselves back their dead. I think that's really interesting. There's also New Testament, but they don't count, right? Why don't they count?
Not part of the Septuagint.
Well, they're not part of the Septuagint, and we don't know if they're in common usage. We think they might have been, but even if they were, we would be breaking our rules, right? Our rules are we only attribute documents. That's why I really don't like to, although we'll throw out comparisons based on what we know of history, right, about Jesus and other things. Those are okay. But when you go and you look and you try to say, well, were they directly quoting from Matthew? Well, unless they actually say, I'm quoting from Matthew, like, by the way, the Apostolic Fathers did. You know, just the next generation from this, they're quoting from Matthew and Hebrews and other works, right? When we see these, which are direct quotes or indirect allusions to the text, they're quite obvious to the Greeks, and they should be obvious to us. On the other hand, it's not so obvious that a lot of the information is shared. And plus, the one thing you don't want to do is what we call recursive proof, you know, or some guys call it revolving proof. Like, for example, if you try to argue with somebody, let's say you tried to convince someone about the truth of Hebrews. The last thing you really want to do is go to Matthew. You know, you might go to Matthew and show them something historical, but you have to go back to Matthew and do what?
Prove Matthew.
Yeah, prove the historicity of Matthew. And you know, if I start with Hebrews, I got to stick in Hebrews, because if I start moving out, I mean,
we view everything in the New Testament from the shadow of the cross.
right.
Yeah.
But our opponents and those that we seek to convince, to persuade, right, don't.
Right.
See? And that's the thing. You will not have a problem if you do a relation to the Old Testament, because you know that Hebrews is directly quoting and alluding to the Septuagint, right? And, by the way, to the apocryphal documents. So no one can question that. I mean, they might, but all you have to do is show it to them, right? And you say, hey, this is an obvious allusion to these Old Testament ideas. And by the way, when they mention the death of Christ, that's an obvious allusion to the history that we have in the Gospels, right? So if you have those kind of quotes or allusions, then you've got an open book. It's a freebie, see? But you've got to be cautious of going, oh, you know, this proves that, therefore, you know, this happened and Jesus said this and did that. It's like, they'll tear you apart. They'll rip you apart like a lion. Their mouths will not be shut. Just say it, you know, they'll get you. So, 36. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put in prison. This is an interesting one. It's not and, it's but. But others, heteros, others. Lambano took, trial, peria, a test, of is added, cruel is added, mockings, epingemos, derision, and kai, scourgings, mastics, a whip, the whip. Yea, it's not yea, it's but. Moreover, yet, eti, of bonds, desmon, a band, and, this is kai, imprisonment, a guardian, fulaka. Literal, it's, but others took a test, piercing. It's, the word test here is P-E-I-R-A. The thing about this word is it comes from pierce, to pierce. Now, I don't think historically we know the context of how testing came from piercing precisely, okay? Maybe it's like piercing maybe if you put a hole through a silver coin or a gold coin, you could tell, you know, by how hard or easy it was to put it or crunch it with your teeth or what, or something. But somehow piercing and the word pira is to test in Greek. So it has kind of a double meaning, you know, or double, it's not like it has a double meaning. To the Greeks, when they hear the word, they see pierce, right? But the pierce means to test. Yes, sir.
Well, it's like when Jesus died, the test of whether he was dead was they pierced him.
Right, that is precise. And also, when Paul was on the road to Damascus, right? It's Damascus. Anyway, I think it's Damascus. Anyway, when he was on the road to Damascus, right? It says, Christ said, "Why are you piercing me? Why are you testing me?" We translated test. Why are you testing me? It's piercing, right? So the presumption in the beautiful Greek that's used is that Paul, by his actions, is re-sacrificing and retesting Christ, right? I mean, the imagery is beautiful. It's very interesting to me they have this word. Okay, so they have this word. It has a double meaning, and every time we see it, every time you see the word test, if you don't have your Greek, you can almost always assume it's this word, to pierce. So the literal is, let's see, did I say it? But others took a test, piercing, derision, and a whip, but yet a band and a guarding. So the translation is, but others accepted the test of derision and the application of the whip while bound and imprisoned. Now, what I would like to point out to you is, you know, we are moving up in time. All of the persuasion chapter, did any of it revert? It all went forward in time. And even the list that they gave us, right? The list of those, the specific people at the end after Rahab, it was a chronological list. So although I am wary of the allusions or the quotes from the Old Testament that are therefore not in, I think that the Greek indicates, the Hebrews writers mean this to be moving up in time. But the ones I have, Genesis 39:20, and let's see, oh, why did I go to Kings here? So I have Kings, 1 Kings 22. There are some that fit. Let's see. 27, let's see, 26, the king of Israel in order to take Micah, send him back to Ammon, the ruler of the city, and to Joash, the king's son, and say, this is what the king says, put this fellow in prison, give him nothing but bread and water until I return safely. We got that one. And then, let's see. We have 2 Chronicles chapter 18. Micah replied, you'll find out the day you go to hide in an inner room. The king of Israel then ordered, take Micah and send him back to Ammon, the ruler of the city, and to Joash, king's son, and say, this is what the king says, put this fellow in prison and give him nothing but bread and water until I return. That's a different one, right? That should be a different one. Anyway, the next one is Jeremiah 20. Jeremiah 20. 1. When the priest of Pashur, son of Immer, the chief officer of the temple of the Lord, heard Jeremiah prophesying these things, he had Jeremiah the prophet beaten and put in the stocks of the upper gate of Benjamin at the Lord's temple. Jeremiah 37:14 starting. It's not true, Jeremiah said, I'm not deserting to the Babylonians, but Uriah would not listen to him. Instead, he arrested Jeremiah and brought him to the officials. They were angry with Jeremiah, had him beaten and imprisoned in the house of Jotham, the secretary, which had him made into a prison. And then Daniel 11. 32, with flattery he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant, but the people who know their God will firmly resist him. And 33, those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword or be burned, captured, or plundered. Okay, and there's also a Genesis one, but for some reason I either missed it or didn't have it in the quote.
39:20.
Do you have 39:20? Could you read it?
39:20.
Yeah.
Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And that's because he thought he was.
Right, messing with his wife. But you see, we're going backwards. And I think the reason, well, let's look at 37 and then see if we can figure this out. They were stoned, they were sawed in two, they were put to death by the sword, they went about in sheepskin and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. So they're just adding to this list. They is added, were is added, stone, lithazo, to lapidate. That literally, that's the word, to lapidate, to throw stones at you, hit you with stones. They is added, were is added, sawn asunder, prezo, to saw in two. Can you imagine you have a word, well, it's not necessarily people, but you know, prezo means to saw things in two, which is kind of interesting. Were is added, tempted. Perazo, to test, to pierce, literally to torture. Were is added, slain with, it's in apathesco. It's apathesco. That's the word we had to die off. In, to die off, phonos. Slain with is they've taken three words. In, apathesco, phonos. Literally, in, to die off, murder. So they're being murdered, basically. The is added, macarena, a knife. They wandered about. Perikomai, to come all around. Perikomai, to come all around. In sheepskin. And by the way, the peri words are really interesting. We get a lot of the peri words, remember, in Paul's writings. So perikomai is to come all around. We usually have the one where you walk around, and that was in Matthew, or Mark also. Mark and Matthew. In melote, sheepskins, and is added, agios, goat, the belonging to a goat, derma. This is really interesting to me. You notice how normally we have a lot of added words, which I told you are warning signs, and we also have a lot of times where they take a word and they mulk it into multiple words because they're trying to refine the meaning for us in English, right? They probably should do that more. But here we have goat skins is agios derma. They've taken two words in Greek and put them together in a single word in English, which fits. It is, no kidding, the skin belonging to a goat. But that is interesting, isn't it? Because if I'd written that, instead of writing goat skin, I would have probably said the skin belonging to a goat, or, you know, because that would be more reflective of the meaning. But this is, I'm being picky here. I'm just saying that's way I've translated. Being destitute, hysterio, to be later afflicted, talibo, to crowd, tormented, kalokcheo, to maltreat. So the literal is stoned, sawn in two, tested, tortured, in murder, died off a knife. They came all around in sheepskins, a hide belonging to a goat, to be later, to be inferior, crowded and maltreated. So stone, sawn in two, this is a translation, stone, sawn in two, tortured, in murder, murdered with a knife, died off. They came all around in sheepskins, hides belonging to a goat, to be inferior, crowded, and maltreated. The only one that I can really think of that was really the goat skin. When you think of goat skins, I mean, there are a few other examples from the Old Testament, but I think of John the Baptist. Yeah, you can think of prophets, but I think of John the Baptist. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. Now, where's my next page? Uh-oh. And we're almost at the end of the time anyway, but I think I printed 50-something pages, but I think I ran out of pages. I'm trying to get through the most important section here because the Logos Tetelos is at the end. But I've got the, let's see, in 36, do I have them? I know, I don't have 37 on here, so you guys are getting a freebie. We will go over the allusions and the direct things next time, specifically for this. But what I think is really interesting about this is what I want you to think about, okay? The Hebrews, this Hebrews thing, especially this chapter, it started with this. 1, but persuasion stands under an expectation of proof of deeds not seen. And the second one was assigning a reason. In this, the members of the Israelite Sanhedrin became a witness. So what we did is we started with this whole idea, an overall idea of deeds not seen, right? The persuasion. And the very first witnesses were the Israelite Sanhedrin because they crucified Christ, right? They put Christ to death. But not only did they put Christ to death, they
They're around in his resurrection.
They saw him resurrected. Yeah. And so the whole point of this persuasion thing was to go back in time and tell you about persuasion. Notice ending with Rahab. And now, I told you, they're not going backwards. They're moving up. So who do you think the end group is going to be?
The listeners.
Yeah.
Precisely. And we're going to see that. So I want you to preempt, if you want to review and look at it and see, it is absolutely as clear water in the Greek. In the English, it may be a little bit funny, and we're going to see how interesting there is actually pretty much a telos at the end of this, but I'll give you a hint. It's at the beginning of 12. And so I really want to get back to the beginning of 12 because of the telos that is actually stated. It's like I said, it's not really a purely stated telos, but it's a beautifully stated logos that wraps up the persuasion chapter. And it's really funny because it's right there at the beginning of 12. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray. Amen.
More and more, I mean,